Hello everyone and welcome to VeggieTalks, the show where I take a look at all things VeggieTales. It's been about a year since the last one of these, and I didn't mean for that much of a break to go by. But we're kicking off Wishlist Week, I don't know how many numbers this has been, with this. My top 5 underrated VeggieTales episodes list. Now, I've been planning to do one of these for a long time. I think ever since Spork the Stone came out. And I was going to have a crossover review with this one guy, but that never really panned out. So now here I am just giving my opinion as it is. Throughout my many years of watching VeggieTales, there have been 5 that have stood out as not very many people talk about them, or people just overlook certain aspects of them, or that kind of stuff. You know what underrated means, I'm sure. And I hope that these 5 get more attention, because they're all great. Specifically the last one, but we'll get to that when we get to that. So, everyone, it's time for my top 5 underrated VeggieTales episodes list. Number 5, A Snoodle's Tale. Right away, a lot of red flags are being raised. Everyone knows about Snoodle's Tale. This is a really popular one. Not actually, really. Everyone knows about the Snoodles and how this was a whole Dr. Seuss send-up. But nobody really talks about the content, they just talk about the whole Snoodle aspect, which is, yes, admittedly clever, and it is really fun. However, there's a lot more to it than, woo, Dr. Seuss, woo, unique creatures, woo! There's a lot more to it than people give it credit for, and I think they just look at the whole Snoodle aspect and just kind of look at it like that. I certainly did until I first saw it when I was younger. First of all, there are the 2 segments, Dr. Jiggle and Mr. Sly, and A Snoodle's Tale proper. So, Dr. Jiggle and Mr. Sly is hilarious, especially if you know the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but you don't need to. Whether it's the terminology they use, the puns like the whole, there's no trouble brewing, sir, I just put in some water and that kind of stuff, or there's just the animation on the dancing, or everyone's favorite part of this, the hand, the feet, go on, Dan! Like all that stuff. That was just great. Also, a little animation error that Phil actually pointed out is that Jimmy is missing his stem in this segment because the overseas animators didn't see that on the storyboard. And this one does have a really sweet lesson in it, but it's just laugh out loud hilarious. The silly song is pretty good, but what blows all of it out of the water is a Snoodle's Tale. This is some really deep stuff. I know, it's a Dr. Seuss parody thing, and it's just kind of funny, silly, and colorful, right? No, actually it gets kind of emotional. What the little Snoodle goes through is very accurate to what a lot of people, specifically older people, actually end up going through, like teenagers. This is kind of a lot of the things that they go through with worrying about how other people perceive them and not how God perceives them. And then showing that what all their comments just weigh them down and then God just makes it lighter. That kind of stuff. The scene where he's talking with the Snoodle creator is one of my favorite VeggieTales moments ever. Every single line of dialogue and every single inflection just works perfectly. I can't sum it up in words, just go out and see it. It's great. Snoodle's Tale is one that I think deserves a lot more attention, whether it be for its comedy on the countertop segments and Dr. Jiggle, Mr. Sly, or just the emotion aspect with, again, the very few parts that are in Dr. Jiggle and Mr. Sly. Or just the Snoodle's Tale. Everything about this works. Everything is great. If you haven't seen it for a while or just haven't seen it overall, go out and check it out. It's one of those episodes that's way more for adults than it is for kids, and I highly recommend it. Number 4, Beauty and the Beat. Now, let's get this out of the way. This is not a good episode. Just regularly speaking, this is not a good episode. The plot is pretty dumb. It's wasted potential. In fact, it's because it's more based off of the original fairy tale and not the Disney one, it let a lot of people down. So Alfonso and I are actually working on remaking this one as the actual Beauty and the Beast story that we know from Disney. But the lesson is kind of weak. The pop culture references are pretty cringy. And overall, it was just kind of a waste. So why is this on the list? It's really funny. The only reason this isn't number 5 is because Snoodle's Tale is pretty well known, just not for the right reasons. This one, everyone hates it, and I can definitely see why, but the writing, when it comes to the humor, is one of the funniest I've seen in a while, and this came right after Celery Night Fever, which is a really stupid episode. My favorite part is Bob as the chef saying, "I'm your biggest fan! I have all your albums! We only have one album, and I have it!" Now, Alfonso and I have talked about this, where we don't think that Bob was a good casting role for that, but we still think it's so funny. And the animation on Bob in this whole thing is great. His facial expressions, the way he rolls, even the way he talks, it's great. I know that's not animation. There's a lot of other really good jokes in there too. Like I know it's a little dated and cringy, but the Wi-Fi thing, I thought that was a pretty good joke. And when it gets to the lesson, it's good, it's fine. It's just that it's the 3-2-1 Penguins thing again. Although not as bad as what 3-2-1 Penguins did. You know, being really superficial and really shallow. So, if you're wanting to just have a quick laugh, but not really gain a whole lot from a lot of creative writing or really just much of anything, then this is it for you. It's kind of the definition of a popcorn movie for VeggieTales. You just put it on, you expect some fluff, not really much substance, but you kind of enjoy it along the way. This would probably be my biggest guilty pleasure out of the lot, and I can definitely see why some people would certainly not like this. I certainly didn't at first, but after watching it again, I saw a lot more jokes in there that just had both me and Alfonso on the floor laughing. So, yeah, try it out. I know it's kind of hard to find sometimes, but I'd say that it's worth seeking out. Number 3 is going to give me a lot of flack. Pistachio, the little boy who wouldn't. This one is hated by most of the fandom because this is where it all started. Right after St. Nicholas, this was the one that came out, and this is the one that started the whole VeggieTales needs to be more about fairy tales and whimsical elements than about Bible stories that teach about God. Now, I still stand by that Pirates Who Don't Do Anything was the part where all the adult stuff was abandoned and where it just became a little kids thing, but this one pushed it even further. This is the one where they decided, hey, this one was a big hit, so let's only do fairy tales. Then we get such amazing ones as The Penniless Princess, Sweet Pea Beauty, The Princess and the Pop Star. You know, all those ones that everyone quote-unquote loved. But I was really surprised when I watched it, because I stayed away from this one. That is, until about 2 years ago. And I was really surprised, because I was going to do a whole review of it, saying, oh, this is so awful, but actually, this is really good. There's a lot that works here. First of all, I love the design of Junior as this little wooden boy. I know it's a little weird, but I kind of see it in the way they did it in The Wizard of Oz. You know, how they made Pa Great the Lion, Larry the Tin Man, Mr. Lunt the Scarecrow, stuff like that. I thought it worked really well. The music is really good, specifically the songs with the 3 brothers. And more specifically, the one where they're in the whale. That one is great. Speaking of the whale, there's a lot of meta-humor about Jonah and stuff, because Khalil is in here, he's always amazing, even in stuff like Tales from the Sock Drawer. But he's in here, and he does a lot of Jonah references, and I really appreciated that. There is a fair bit of jokes for adults, and there are a couple missed jokes here and there, like I didn't really care that much for the whole Monopoly thing, and the ducklings weren't amazing in humor, but for everything that doesn't work, there's always something else to counteract it. It's not perfect, but I don't think it was really trying to be. But I do have to say, people I still think don't give it enough credit, because there's the music, there's the animation, there's the writing, which I said is pretty good, but the emotional aspect is really strong in this. Specifically in the last third where Pistachio is on that roller coaster thing, and Gelato's looking for him, and then they go into the whale and they find the brothers. I thought all of that was very well done. It teaches a lesson perfectly. It doesn't bash you over the head with it, but it makes it strong enough to where you learn it. And also, it's a little subliminal, because the emotion of the episode is actually taking the forefront here. Yet, subconsciously, both of them take priority because they don't bash it over the head, so you're able to pick up on it through the themes. And believe it or not, this was actually the one that helped us realize that this could get to a wider array of audiences. So this is why we're taking this similar approach in our show. The one that's coming out, not the ones that we have on the channel right now. Because I know you certainly don't learn anything from VeggieTales Abridged. That's not important. I think why they ended up going the route that they did was because Pistachio, believe it or not, was a big hit with critics. People did like it a lot, especially parents. They thought it was very well done with the lesson and the tone, so I think they misread this as, oh, they like the fairy tales, so they went the wrong way with it, not realizing that they liked the writing on this, because the writing is really good, and I really liked it, and so did a lot of other people. But lately, because of what's happened to Big Idea, I think this one's become under fire for starting the whole fairy tale trend, which nobody is in the mood to defend. But either way, I still give Pistachio, the little boy that wouldn't, 2 thumbs up. Also, that silly song was great. Number 2. Everyone talks about Little Joe, but nobody talks about Mo and the Big Exit, which is the sequel to Little Joe that some people were asking for. Big Idea's always done some sequel stuff, but they've never been as good as the original, up until that point. And while I still don't think Mo and the Big Exit comes as good as Little Joe, I still think it's pretty dang good. First of all, I give them props for doing the Moses story, because they originally had something called Frog Wars that they were doing with a book. They were thinking about doing that at first. Then they thought about just straight up telling the story of Moses, but then they decided, hey, Little Joe's a big hit, so let's do this one. And it makes sense, because that is chronologically, in the Bible at least, the next story. You know, being in Exodus, and that one was in Genesis, but that's not important. I'm not here to talk about that. The theming is just as good as it was in Little Joe. Everything that they had in Little Joe is back in this, like the horses being stick horses, all the dodgeball stuff. The Lone Ranger stuff is definitely lost on kids, though, but adults certainly get it. But I'm afraid that the future generations just will not get it. But I think they're just going to laugh at the pure silliness of it, rather than actually get the reference, or even worse, they'll think it's a reference to that movie that came out a few years back. The casting is great, the writing is great, the Western theme I think is actually stronger in here than Little Joe. Now, not better, stronger, because they get a country music narrator to narrate the whole thing. They have a lot more country sounding songs, and while the songs in Little Joe are still fantastic, this one definitely does sound like a more old Western style, specifically the old Lone Stranger song. This one's really easy to summarize. Basically, if you liked Little Joe, you're gonna like this one. It's got everything that Little Joe had, minus some more of the heart. Like, the heart was really strong in Little Joe. This one, it's got it, but just not nearly as strong. Everything else is here, though. Everything else works really, really well. And a lot of people talked about it at the time, but not so much now. Now it's just kind of Little Joe, Little Joe, Little Joe. Now I think it should be Little Joe and Mo, because, well, they're kind of 2 parts, and they do reference the fact that Little Joe and Mo are basically the same character. Quite a bit. And it's funny. Really? That's all I can say. If you like Little Joe, you're gonna like Mo. Next. Number 1. I've wanted to talk about this one for a long time because I think this one is just as good as the classics. Now, this is getting towards the middle-ish end of Big Idea's run, because, let's face it, they're not doing anything now except for Religitables in the festering city. But I've wanted to talk about this one ever since I started talking about VeggieTales, because this one has got it all. Tomato Sawyer and Huckleberry Larry's Big River Rescue. When I think about an episode that just recaptures the magic of the series, I think of this one. This one seems like one of them they would have done around Jonah or Lyle times, because, I don't know, maybe they were thinking about doing it, but everything in here is great. And yes, it is based on Huckleberry Finn, a book that I just think is okay, and one that you certainly don't think can be adapted for kids, keeping in a lot of the stuff. But you know what? Although they do change a little bit, they do keep a lot in there. Everything works. The animation is really good. They start putting on textures on them here, and it looks really well done. The songs are wonderful, whether it just be the songs that they sing in general, albeit very few of them, or that hilarious silly song which I put at number 3 for my favorites list, or the background score even. The background score is very well done. There's the humor, which I think is just, it does transfer into the songs too. Like the whole, we're loggers, logs! Like that whole thing, or there's the Splinter. Everything with Little Yimmy is really funny. The Duke and King are hysterical. And I can't believe they threw in a Dukes of Hazzard reference and nobody got it. It was so obvious, but it was so funny. The only joke I can think of that doesn't work in this whole thing is the must be a slumber party thing. Other than that, I think everything else works perfectly in the humor department. But what really works is the lesson and story. They talk about how it's really important to do good for others, you know, that kind of thing. Now, if it was any other show, like 321 Penguins or just any other really cheap show, they would have just left it at that. But they also talk about how if you know the right thing that you're supposed to do for someone and you don't do it, it's the same as hurting them. And it shows that, yes, you do need to sacrifice a lot. Helping people isn't always easy, and it's not always profitable for you. But in the end, you get a feeling that is better than any of the other things you could have wanted, because you know you helped someone. It's very, very clear that they put a lot of work into this one, and they promoted it quite a bit too, and it was a decent hit, but no one ever talks about it, except for Biscuit and Zaza Miranda-bo. That's the only thing anyone ever remembers this for. I think if Zaza Miranda-bo was on another one, people wouldn't even talk about this one at all. But how did this one turn out so well? Let's look at the credits. Oh, well, would you look at that? It's written by Phil Vischer, and nobody else. Huh. Oh, and, well, wouldn't you know, some of my industry contacts have let me know that this one was one of the very few late series episodes that had almost no meddling in the script or production. So it's almost like they let Big Idea be Big Idea. Funny how that works, that when you don't give them any restrictions and just let them do what they want, they turn out a pretty good product. Imagine that. I wish we could have had some of that these days. With some of this that's going on. Anyways, Big River Rescue is an amazing episode, and I highly recommend watching it if you're going to rewatch any of these. So that was my top 5 underrated VeggieTales episodes list. Now tomorrow, we're going to go on the inverse. Top 5 overrated episodes, and geez, that's going to hurt. Alright, see you guys tomorrow.
Good night, everybody.